That's good.
With your permission, Mr. Frank, I would like now to move to another important subject regarding the implication of some German companies in the illegal exploitation of Sahrawi resources. There are, according to information, around 15 German companies investing in the occupied territories of Western Sahara. For example, the famous Siemens or Edinburgh Siemens. Why doesn't the German government and civil society put pressures on German companies to stop playing the game of the occupier? And how can Germany play a positive role in imposing the respect of international law globally if its own companies and citizens are the first to violate it?
Now, there are two or three different areas. The one is we try to go by international law as country, so that's why we don't have an embassy in the territories or in the occupied part, not a Moroccan embassy, to not call it Moroccan, but what companies do, that's not always in our hands. I did letters to Heidelberg Cement and to the companies that do the energy that you mentioned. So we can, but there has to be by law challenged, and that is the opposite of a government. A government can work a certain way, and law has to challenge situations. And I don't know how a lawsuit against Heidelberg Cement or some other of these 15 companies would end, but law can be spoken only through the process of a suit, and not by a government saying. That's not how we deal with that. We can make a standpoint, we can challenge something, we can word something, which I several times did, but we are not the ones who do the judgment. That has to be as the political roles of law speaking and law making has to be different. That's why a government from us will not just say this is unlawful, because we're not allowed to.
Still with the same subject related to the respect of the Sahrawi people's permanent sovereignty over their natural resources, the European Court of Justice in two major rulings considered it illegal for the European Union to include Western Sahara territory or products in any trade agreement with Morocco. Yet the European Union Commission finds ways to bypass these rulings. How can Europe convince other African and non-European actors of its respects of the rule of the law and human and people's rights if it continues violating its own laws?
I'm not too much into this justice because I'm not a lawyer. Many of my colleagues are, but we try to balance it as best as possible. Saying if we miss the goal in this case, that we are principally, and I said we did not take too much priority, from my opinion, even not enough priority on the issue. So to make right away what Morocco did with us, they're not satisfied with our reaction and our wording towards the deal. I call it a deal between the United States or Mr. Trump and Morocco and Israel. We're not the ones that cut the diplomatic discourse. They did. This is not our way of dealing with issues. We try to speak it out. We try in our diplomatic channels say this is not right. When it was, I remember, I think it was 9 or 10 years ago, when we had this issue with a fishery agreement between the European Union, especially Spain, and the waters surrounding Morocco. And they implied the waters of the Western Sahara, of the occupied territories, we invested saying, no, this is not right. And they stopped it, at least for 1 year, as I remember. That was possible. And then they had to rediscuss what is allowed and what is not. So in some short issues, we did put a break on issues, you know, but I think it is not with every little part at every time possible. Again, criticizing that we didn't put enough priority and value in the conflict.
There is another subject has to do with the relation between Morocco and some European countries. The actual dispute with Spain. How do you see that? And do you think that there are other parties encouraging Morocco to behave in such way, especially that the Moroccan is using children to achieve some political position about his allegations concerning the conflict of Western Sahara?
Now, in this, I would not nicely put, but use still the word game. There are many cards played that aren't valuable, but I think from several sides. And I don't know whether Morocco is actively doing that. This is not what I could confirm from what I hear from the news. But that this was anticipated, that refugees are taken as tool, sort of, by several sides, and to argue politically as the migration pressure on Europe, and at that case, Spain. That was to expect, you know? And now, knowing of this critical situation in the interior policies in EU as a whole, and the countries each, now that's an easy card played in the game. I wouldn't wonder if Morocco did something to play it, but I cannot give proof that they actively did, because the pressure is in Morocco as well, from several sides and the migration routes. So it can be instrumentalized. It can be also just the case as it is. And we still have to find, as best as possible, the truth, who is behind it and who is misusing his cards.
So do you think that there are other parties encouraging Morocco, I mean, behind
that?
us?
No, I said I cannot guarantee. I wouldn't wonder. Exactly. I'm not blaming anybody yet.
Yeah. Germany is the first European country now present and welcomed in Africa. How do you see this rule after that rules, or after those rules of France and Spain, and even Spain? And which role can play now Germany to solve the problem, many problems, including the problem of Western Sahara?
Yeah, there are several tries of answers to that question. First of all, I'm somebody who believes very much in North-South-South cooperation. That means we're not just telling everybody what to do. You know, we have a story, not Germany especially, but many of the European countries. And in the meantime, the United States weren't out of that as well. And now it is Turkey, India, and China, you know, telling. So I want to abstain of that. We know better what you should be doing. But in good relations, we want to play a fair card to stay in that image of a game, you know, and use the credibility, which some of the countries that we've mentioned before have lost in the last 50 years or even 100 years. Now, we try in diplomatic ways as best as possible to play these cards well. But that is not possible at every time, in every issue. And it is not all in the open. As you know, all the diplomatic channels, that half or more of the possibilities of influence are not seen under the surface, our daily business. And I know from the approach that we try it in our best will to invest. The second reasoning behind it, we have to solve this issue on the European side as the EU and with the Commission. As long as you rightly say that Spain and France, let's call it that way, are sort of biased in this whole issue. And as long as we as Germany, from what I said, are not prioritizing the issue as big and necessary and important enough, we're just hiding behind that biased status. We leave it to Spain and to France to be the voice. And now it is our possibility. And by the way, this Trump situation, gives us now an option to say something louder and say something more clear. And we know it hurt the Moroccan people, the country, the government, so much that we got this reaction. But I believe we have to solve it in the European reaction. Now we try to be voice inside, maybe through Mrs. Commission President von der Leyen, and to balance out how I feel, the biasedness of Spain.
Do you think that the state of Western Sahara in north of Africa can help in installing peace and stability? And then if we solve the question, that will guarantee peace?
My opinion on that, there is never a guarantee, just to be said. I never believe in a guarantee for peace, because we're all still with our histories, and we are persons, and even being a former pastor and knowing about the good in people, I know also of the bad in people. So no guarantee, but that it would bring a bigger potential and a better possibility of stability and peace if this conflict is solved and there is a clear grounded on an UN and EU basis and relationships, status of the Western Sahara, whatever that be, but that the Saharan people had spoken. That I believe then we would have more possible stability.